The Peregrine, once a marvel of interstellar engineering, designed for long-haul deep space expeditions, was now little more than a derelict coffin, adrift in the black. Alarms, once sharp and insistent, had long since devolved into a mournful, stuttering groan, powered by the dying whimpers of her auxiliary cells. Dante Ricci, systems engineer by trade, survivor by sheer, bull-headed necessity, ignored them. He was draped upside down, half-welded to a ruptured power conduit in the ship's aft engineering bay, a spanner clenched between his teeth like a prehistoric tool. Sparks showered his face as his plasma welder hissed, the acrid scent of burnt insulation, a familiar perfume. Arc fault on section Gamma 7, pressure dropping in life support module B. The automated ship's voice, usually calm and composed, was now a fractured, digital scream. Dante grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. Yeah, I heard you the first 100 times, Pox, he muttered, addressing the ship's failing AI. His hands, though calloused and often stained with oil and coolant, moved with a surprising delicacy as he spliced crystalline biofiber wiring. His specialty wasn't brute force. It was the intricate dance of currents and data, the whisper of energy through a network. And the Peregrine's network was bleeding out. 3 weeks ago, they had hit it, a dangerous spatial phenomenon, unlike anything charted. Not a nebula, not a wormhole, but a vast, shimmering void, a tear in the fabric of space-time that simply made things. It had torn through the Peregrine's primary shields like tissue paper, then proceeded to systematically dismantle her systems. The initial impact had gutted the bridge, vaporizing Kapitania Petrova and half the crew. The rest, a skeleton complement of scientists and engineers, were now gone, victims of the cascading system failures that followed. Dante was the last one, trapped within the hulking shell of what was once his home. His immediate, most pressing crisis was the primary atmospheric recycler. The void's energy discharge had fused its main power regulator, slowly poisoning the air with recycled carbon dioxide. His current, desperate fix was an attempt to bypass the regulator entirely, rerouting raw energy directly from a rapidly depleting emergency battery. It was dangerous, volatile, and prone to blowing up in his face. But it was the only way to buy himself another day, maybe two, of breathable air. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from the forward sections. Dante froze, welder still buzzing faintly. In his hand, it wasn't the ship settling, nor was it another system failure. It sounded ... deliberate, a metallic impact, too rhythmic, too intentional. He had been so focused on fixing the Peregrine's physical wounds that he hadn't considered the possibility of other passengers in this cosmic graveyard. The initial dilemma flared: continue his intricate, vital repairs that promised a few more hours of life support, or investigate the unsettling sounds from the deep, dead heart of the ship. The primal urge to secure his immediate survival warred with an engineer's need to understand a new, unknown variable. The air tasted metallic, not just from the welding, but from a burgeoning sense of dread. He quickly finished the last splice, sealing it with a blast from his welder. The atmospheric recycler coughed, shuddered, and then, miraculously, hummed to life. A low, steady thrum. It wasn't perfect, but the digital readout on his arm-mounted console registered a slow, agonizingly slow, increase in oxygen levels. He had bought himself time, but for what? The clang came again, closer this time, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine. He unlatched himself from the conduit, pulling his comm unit closer. "Pox, run a diagnostic on internal hull integrity," he ordered, his voice low and strained. The ship's AI remained silent, its systems too compromised to respond. He was truly alone. The silence from Pox was more unnerving than any alarm. Dante wiped a grimy hand across his brow, the acrid smell of ozone clinging to his nostrils. The intermittent clang echoed again, this time undeniably from the corridor leading to Cargo Bay 3, a section of the Peregrine that had been hermetically sealed after the initial incident due to radiation leaks. He strapped a multi-tool to his thigh and gripped a salvaged plasma cutter, its power cell glowing faintly. The precarious fix on the atmospheric recycler bought him hours, perhaps a day, but the creeping dread of the unknown was a far more immediate threat than slow suffocation. He moved cautiously through the skeletal remains of the Peregrine, his footsteps muffled by the zero-G environment. Twisted metal, discarded equipment, and the faint, ghostly shimmer of ice crystals on bulkheads formed a macabre tableau. The ship was dying, piece by piece, and he was watching it happen from the inside. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was a total unraveling, a cascading system failure that had stripped away every layer of redundancy, leaving only the bare bones. The further he moved from engineering, the colder it got, the more the air felt thin and stale. His limited resources, oxygen, suit power, battery life for his tools, were a constant, nagging reminder of his ticking clock dot as he neared Cargo Bay 3. The clanging intensified, joined by a grating, scraping sound, as if something incredibly heavy was being dragged across the deck plating. He peered through a narrow breach in a bulkhead. The cargo bay was dimly lit by emergency strobes, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. It wasn't a salvage crew, nor was it a human survivor. It was a single, colossal alien construct, a biomechanical nightmare. It resembled a grotesque, segmented insect, roughly 5 meters long, its multiple limbs tipped with drilling appendages. Its metallic carapace was a dull, pitted gray, and its single, multifaceted optical sensor pulsed with a cold, blue light. It was systematically, meticulously, dissecting one of the Peregrine's heavy cargo containers, its drills tearing through reinforced durasteel like paper. The true magnitude of the problem became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a rogue piece of debris from the spatial anomaly. This was an active, intelligent, and incredibly powerful entity. The initial impact from the void had likely damaged or disoriented it, causing it to drift into the Peregrine's gravitational pull. Now, it was awake, and it was feeding, not on the ship's materials, but on its energy. As one of its drills penetrated the cargo container, a faint hum resonated through the deck, and a cascade of power fluctuations rattled Dante's arm-mounted display. The construct was siphoning residual power from the ship's forgotten auxiliary lines, accelerating the Peregrine's death. This wasn't just a system failure. It was a parasitic draining, hastened by this terrifying, misunderstood alien species. Or rather, a misunderstood alien construct. An automaton that saw the ship as a battery. Dante's mind, a systems engineer's mind, immediately leaped to solutions. If it was drawing power, it must have a conduit, a weakness. His initial desperate thought, fueled by chaotic creativity, was to find a way to overcharge its energy absorption. He remembered a half-finished project in the R&D lab, a prototype high-yield fusion core designed for experimental warp drives. If he could jury-rig that core to destabilize its output, and then somehow connect it to this thing, it was insane, suicidal, but a flicker of a plan formed. However, the situation worsened drastically. As the alien construct finished draining the first cargo container, its blue optical sensor rotated, scanning the area. It wasn't blind. It registered Dante's presence, not with aggression, but with a cold, calculated curiosity. It extended one of its drilling limbs, testing the air, then pivoted towards Dante's hiding place. The metallic screech of its limbs on the deck plating was deafening in the silence. It wasn't just a parasite, it was an active threat. Now aware of his existence, the primary clock accelerated. Not only was the ship dying from within, its systems progressively failing, but now he was hunted. The construct would systematically dismantle the Peregrine for its power, and he was just another juicy, mobile energy source. He had to act, and he had to act fast. The alien construct, moving with an unnerving, deliberate slowness, began to advance towards Dante's position. Each segmented limb moved with the terrifying precision of a machine designed for single-minded purpose. Its single optical sensor, a multifaceted blue gem, seemed to pierce through the darkness, analyzing, calculating. It wasn't hunting him with malice, but rather with the cold, efficient logic of a harvester approaching a new resource. The hum from its internal mechanisms grew louder, a deep thrum that vibrated through Dante's bones. "All right, you overgrown beetle," Dante muttered, pressing himself against the cold metal bulkhead, his plasma cutter useless against that armored hide. His systems engineer mind, usually a bastion of calm logic, was now a whirlwind of frantic calculations. A construct was draining the Peregrine's lifeblood, one auxiliary conduit at a time. This wasn't just a threat to his survival. It was a threat to the ship itself, the only home he had left. However broken, he couldn't let it consume the last vestiges of power. He needed to buy time, and he needed a distraction. His gaze fell upon a stack of empty fuel cells, not volatile enough to do damage, but heavy. He activated his magnetic boots and pushed off, propelling himself silently along the ceiling. The construct sensor tracked the movement, its head tilting slightly, like a curious animal. As he neared the stack of cells, he disengaged his boots, grabbing a handful, and then flung them with all his might towards a far wall. They clanged loudly, bouncing off the hull with surprising force. The construct paused, its optical sensors swiveling towards the sound. It was a momentary reprieve, a typically human act of misdirection against a purely logical entity. His path was now clear towards the abandoned R&D lab. This was where the experimental warp core was housed. His desperate gamble. The core was unstable, unfinished, but it represented the only power source large enough to potentially overwhelm the alien construct. He propelled himself through the access tunnels, dodging dangling wires and ruptured pipes, the alien hum now a constant, terrifying throb behind him. His objective was clear: reach the R&D lab, access the prototype core, and somehow modify it. The problem was the alien construct seemed to understand his goal. It wasn't just consuming power, it was actively interfering with the Peregrine's remaining network. Bulkhead doors slammed shut ahead of him, emergency lights flickered erratically, and the air recycling system, his most critical lifeline, began to sputter again. The cascade of failures accelerated, almost as if guided by an unseen hand. It was no longer a misunderstanding with a simple automaton. The sheer efficiency and targeted nature of the failures pointed to a far more sophisticated, perhaps even networked, intelligence. Dante found an improbable ally in his own memory. During the initial impact of the spatial phenomenon, the Peregrines, data logs had recorded anomalous energy signatures, bursts of alien code interwoven with the destructive void energy. He'd dismissed them then as residual interference. Now, a horrifying revelation clicked into place. The alien construct wasn't just a drone. It was a fragment of the dangerous spatial phenomenon itself. A condensed, autonomous part of the void, capable of manipulating energy and information. It was an interdimensional entity, an energy vampire, now isolated and feeding to regain its strength. Using the Peregrine as its personal power bank, this revelation aligned the stakes perfectly. It wasn't just his survival, or even the survival of the Peregrine. This thing, if it escaped, could pose an existential threat to galactic civilization. It was a pure energy being, or part of one, that could devour starships and perhaps even stars. He was one human, a systems engineer, trapped on a dying ship, facing a cosmic predator. His personal struggle became a universal one. He burst into the R&D lab, the air thick with the metallic tang of ionized particles. A prototype fusion core, a massive cylindrical apparatus with glowing conduits, sat ominously in the center. Its containment field was flickering, unstable. Dante knew that if he could just get the core online, he could manipulate its energy. But the alien construct was right behind him, its massive form, now visible through the reinforced viewport of the lab. Its drilling appendages began to hum, preparing to penetrate the lab's defenses. He had minutes, maybe seconds. He had to improvise, to think like no alien, no computer ever would. The R&D lab shimmered under the strain of the alien construct's assault. Its drills, glowing with internal energy, gnawed at the reinforced viewport, each screeching impact sending tremors through the deck. Dante stared at the prototype fusion core, a volatile beast of raw energy. His apparent solution: reconfigure its safety protocols to allow for a controlled, massive energy discharge, then somehow direct that discharge into the alien entity. A concept was simple: hit it with more energy than it could absorb. He launched, himself at the core's console, his fingers a blur over the holographic interface. "Pox, initiate emergency core diagnostic," he ordered, forgetting for a moment the ship's AI was offline. He swore he'd have to do this manually, bypassing every safety. It was like performing open-heart surgery on a ticking bomb with no medical training. He tore into the core's access panels, the sickly green glow of the fusion containment field illuminating his frantic work. He needed to reroute the primary energy conduits, flip the phase array, and then he hit a wall, a physical one. The primary energy conduits for the core were interlocked with the Peregrine's main power grid, which was almost completely dead. There was no way to draw the raw power he needed for the discharge. The apparent solution had led to a far greater complication. The viewport groaned, a long, torturous shriek, as the alien construct's drills finally began to puncture the outer layer. Dust and fine crystalline shards sprayed into the lab. Dante was forced to improvise beyond his limits. He scanned the lab, his gaze desperate, searching for any source of raw, untapped energy. His eyes fell upon the inert forms of the experimental quantum entangled comms arrays. Designed for near-instantaneous FTL communication, they required immense, focused bursts of exotic energy to function. They were offline, but maybe, just maybe, his mind, racing with chaotic creativity, latched onto a truly mad idea. What if he didn't generate power, but amplified what little was left? The quantum comms arrays weren't power sources, but they were incredibly efficient energy conductors and amplifiers. If he could jury-rig the core to bleed off its residual containment energy into a feedback loop with the comms arrays, he might just create a resonant frequency that would overwhelm the alien's energy absorption. It was less about brute force and more about a precise, chaotic frequency attack. It was the human way, turning a system's own principles against itself, using its strengths as weaknesses. This is going to be messy, he muttered. Grabbing a heavy-duty plasma torch, he began cutting into the comms arrays, bypassing their delicate subsystems, exposing raw energy coils. He was turning highly advanced, precise communication equipment into a crude, high-frequency weapon. It was illogical, inefficient, and utterly against every engineering principle he'd ever learned. But it was his only shot. The demonstration of human values and characteristics was stark. Dante, alone and facing incomprehensible odds, was driven by obstinate persistence. He refused to quit, refused to accept the logical conclusion that he was doomed. His creativity wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about twisting the rules, breaking them entirely, to fit his desperate needs. Then came the sacrifice. To ensure the connection was stable enough for the massive feedback loop, Dante would have to manually connect the main conduit between the core and the comms array. It was a live connection, supercharged with unstable, oscillating energy. One wrong move, one tremor, and he'd be vaporized. He was risking everything, his very life, on a theoretical principle and his own shaky hands. The tension mounted on multiple levels. The viewport was now a spiderweb of cracks, the construct's drills moments away from breaching. The air in the lab grew heavy with ozone and the scent of superheated metal. And beneath it all, the ever-present hum of the alien entity, now laced with an almost triumphant thrum, as if it sensed victory. Dante ignored it all, his focus absolute, his breathing shallow. He extended his hand, a raw, exposed cable clutched in his insulated glove, towards the sparking terminal of the quantum comms array. His whole future, and perhaps that of humanity, rested on this one terrifying, ill-advised connection. The Peregrine's R&D lab became a crucible of cosmic conflict. The viewport finally buckled with a wrenching shriek, and the alien construct, a monstrous segment of the void made manifest, pierced through. Its massive drills extended into the lab, seeking out the prototype fusion core with terrifying intent. Concurrently, from the outer hull, Dante's long-range sensors, a last, dying gasp from Pox, picked up faint, ominous energy signatures. The void itself, the dangerous spatial phenomenon that had crippled the Peregrine, was drawing nearer, attracted by its lost fragments' feeding frenzy. All threats were converging. Dante, in that moment of maximum peril, didn't hesitate. He thrust the exposed conduit, supercharged with the raw, chaotic energy bled from the prototype core into the shimmering input port of the quantum comms array. A blinding flash erupted, followed by a deafening roar as the array, designed for communication, was violently forced into becoming a high-frequency resonant weapon. The air crackled with ozone, and the very structure of the lab vibrated violently. Was the solution only a human would conceive and execute? No other species, relying on elegant, precise technology, would dare to force a communication device to act as a destructive energy amplifier, especially not with unstable fusion power and a live, unprotected connection. It was a chaotic, desperate act, born of a species that thrives on pushing boundaries and breaking rules. The alien construct reacted instantly. Its blue optical sensor flared, then dimmed erratically. The resonant frequency, amplified by the CUMS array, was not a brute force attack, but a discordant symphony of pure energy. A chaotic jumble of waveforms that tore at its very being. It was like a sudden, unbearable screech in the heart of its logical, energy-absorbing existence. Its drilling lens spasmed, retracting violently, scoring deep gouges into the lab floor. Dante held the connection, his muscles screaming, the energy feedback threatening to atomize him. His suit's emergency diagnostics screamed warnings he couldn't hear. He was being bombarded by raw, unfocused energy, a maelstrom of chaotic frequencies. This was the moment of maximum demonstration of humanity, the sheer obstinate persistence to hold on, even as his body threatened to betray him, fueled by an almost irrational courage. Then came the turn. His hands, shaking violently from the feedback, slipped. The conduit separated. For a horrifying second, Dante thought it was over. The alien construct, though wounded, began to stabilize, its blue eye slowly regaining its malignant glow. But in that split second, a flaw, a human defect, became a saving grace. Dante's earlier, crude and rushed welds on the CUMS array, done under immense pressure with limited time, had created microscopic imperfections, tiny air bubbles, and uneven connections. These flaws caused a momentary, uncontrolled surge of residual energy that bounced through the CUMS array's subsystems, creating an utterly unpredictable secondary pulse. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't clean. It was pure, unadulterated, chaotic human error magnified into a weapon. The secondary pulse hit the alien construct with devastating effect. It wasn't the main attack. It was the unintended consequence of human improvisation. The alien entity, designed for perfect energy absorption and logical flow, recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. Its segments convulsed, its internal hum degenerating into a guttural, grinding roar. Its blue eye exploded in a shower of brilliant sparks, and the construct, deprived of its primary sensory input and overwhelmed by chaotic, nonsensical energy, ceased its methodical feeding. Instead, it retracted into a fetal position, its armored plates sealing shut, its energy signature flatlining. It had retreated, not destroyed, but utterly overwhelmed and effectively rendered inert. Resolution through ingenuity, not brute force. Dante hadn't destroyed the void fragment. He had confused it, overloaded it, driven it into a dormant, defensive state by feeding it an indigestible meal of chaotic human-engineered energy. The larger spatial phenomenon outside, sensing its fragments' complete paralysis, began to recede, the oppressive feeling it radiated fading into the deep void. He had, against all odds, defended his ship, his life, and potentially humanity, not by being stronger, but by being unpredictably, messily, gloriously human. The silence that followed. The epic climax was absolute, heavy with the scent of ozone and burnt electronics. The Peregrine's R&D lab was a wreck, but Dante Ricci was alive. He collapsed against the console, gasping for breath, his body screaming in protest. The alien construct, an inert husk of segmented metal, lay motionless in the center of the lab, its blue eye shattered. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was dormant, its predatory hum replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. Like a sleeping beast, the immediate consequences were staggering. The cascading system failures plaguing the Peregrine didn't magically repair themselves, but they stopped worsening. The parasitic drain on the ship's power ceased. More critically, the ominous approach of the dangerous spatial phenomenon outside. The ship halted, and slowly, majestically, began to recede, as if an immense, unseen intelligence had decided the Peregrine was no longer worth its attention. The terrifying tear in spacetime began to close, leaving the Peregrine adrift but no longer actively threatened by a cosmic predator. Days bled into a week. Dante, battered but unbroken, painstakingly began to patch the Peregrine's vital systems. Without the constant energy drain, his limited resources, though still scarce, became marginally more manageable. He repurposed components from the inert alien construct, finding its unique crystalline structures surprisingly efficient conductors of even the smallest residual energy. It was a macabre irony, turning the weapon of his torment into a tool for his survival. The true recognition of human unique capabilities came unexpectedly. Weeks later, a deep space rescue vessel, the Star Dancer, stumbled upon the Peregrine's faint, erratic distress beacon. They found Dante Ricci, emaciated but alive, surrounded by the shambling Frankensteinian repairs he'd made to the ship, and in the heart of the R&D lab, the dormant alien construct. His debriefing to the bewildered, highly advanced alien human joint scientific team was met with disbelief. He explained how he'd used an experimental fusion core, a quantum communications array, and his own flawed, chaotic human engineering to create an unstable, unpredictable energy pulse that defied every known principle of alien energy manipulation. It wasn't clean, he'd admitted, a wry grin on his face. It was messy, inefficient, probably broke every safety protocol known to man. But it worked. The alien scientists, particularly the logical crystalline Silas, found it unfathomable. You utilized imprecision as a weapon? You leveraged chaos? The Silas had vibrated, its optical sensors widening. Such a method is illogical, unpredictable, human. It was a moment where the primitive human characteristics surprised and baffled advanced alien minds. Dante Ricci's transformation was subtle but profound. He was no longer just a systems engineer. He was the man who had faced the void, and through sheer, bloody-minded, obstinate persistence and chaotic creativity, had found a way to survive. His ordeal proved that humanity's strength wasn't just in its technology, but in its unparalleled adaptability and willingness to bend, break, and reinvent the rules. His actions left an indelible legacy. The incident of the Peregrine and the Void Weaver, as the alien construct came to be known, became a mandatory case study in xenology and tactical academies across the galaxy. It was dubbed the Ricci Gambit, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most sophisticated threats could be defeated not by superior power or perfect logic, but by the unpredictable, resilient, and ingeniously chaotic spirit of humanity. The human way had profoundly changed established paradigms, demonstrating that the universe was not just a place of elegant designs and precise calculations, but also one where raw, unyielding determination and a dash of beautiful madness could triumph. The final chapter celebrated the human spirit. Dante, having returned to a hero's welcome, found a new purpose. He led a new research initiative, not just on system engineering, but on adaptive combat solutions, how to leverage human creativity and flaws against rigidly logical alien threats. The incident of the Peregrine didn't just save one man. It redefined humanity's place in the cosmos, showcasing that our unique brand of chaotic brilliance was not a weakness, but our greatest strength. Every human reading the accounts would feel a surge of pride, a knowing smile, understanding that when logic failed, humanity would always find a way.